Right now, all merch on the Geekdom 101 store is 25% off. That includes the father-son Ultra Instinct Beast Goku Gohan shirt, which is one of my favorites. It comes in multiple colors and sizes all the way up to 5X. But it also, you can get it in a hoodie or anything else you'd like. A oversized shirt, a long sleeve. Tons of options, plus everything else as well. The Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta shirt, the then, now, forever Goku and Gohan variants, all available right now, 25% off. Hurry, because this deal won't last. The link is in the description. Gohan was in Dragon Ball Daima. He was supposed to be in Dragon Ball Daima. Are you kidding me? Man, this is wild. Okay, so we've got another brand new interview coming from the Dragon Ball Daima Episode 1 commentary track. Now, the commentary track is only available on the Japanese Blu-ray and 4K, and it stars Akio Ioku, Aya Komaki, who's the series director, and Yoshitaka Yashima, who's the producer. And it's a director's commentary like you'd hear over, you know, any TV show or movie where they're just discussing you know, basically some behind the scenes stuff about Dragon Ball Daima, and there's a lot of new revelations that we're discovering here on this video about what the plans were for Daima, how everything came together. Like, it's really interesting, and also again about the Gohan thing and some of the ideas and Toriyama's involvement, like how Toriyama was involved, because he didn't create everything. You know, I think there's a big misunderstanding about how this collaboration worked. Even though Dragon Ball Daima is the most work that Toriyama's ever done on an anime series, more than he's done on the old ones or Super, because he was doing the manga for the original, you know, Dragon Ball and Z and whatnot when the anime was coming out. With Daima, it was back and forth, trading ideas and art, and we're going to get to some of that here. I want to go through some of the highlights for you guys. So before we go any further, I actually want to give full credit to Enomis Venixis for the translation. If you want to read the entire transcript of the commentary track, I will leave a link down in the description. When you have some time, check that out. I'm going to go over the bullet points, the important ones that at least I think that are important. But if you want to read the full one, I'll have that for you in the description, as well as a link to Venixis's socials. They talked on this interview about how the very first episode had a recap. Remember how the first episode recapped the story of Goku and sort of like his enemies and whatnot? The idea was that the series was going to introduce people to Dragon Ball if there were new fans. So the idea is, if you're a new fan, you don't have to have seen anything else. Daima will catch you up with the very first episode, with the very first that opening like intro where they would Dragon Ball and they'd show the balls and go over the story. I'm sure you guys remember that. And the other thing was to set up where it took place, because it's a sequel to the Majin Buu saga. So that's why in the opening credits or the opening prelude, they didn't say anything about Super or, you know, Goku's future battles or none of that. This was meant to be a direct sequel to the Buu saga, and that's what it is. I mean, it's a sequel to the Buu arc. It takes place shortly after the Buu arc. Something that we broke here on the Geekdom 101 channel a couple of years ago. Now, moving on to the next, like before the show started, moving on to the next piece of evidence here. Basically, it says that Toriyama's first draft of the Daima script was incomplete. And he actually says that the outline was only halfway. So the first script that Toriyama submitted to Toei for Daima was only half the story. And that's interesting because basically it was sort of like, okay, here, like, here's half the story, go ahead and get started. And I guess that's when they started working on designs and things like that, even though Toriyama approved of and drew his own models, and we're going to get to that shortly. It's interesting to note that the first draft didn't even have the whole story. Does that mean that Toriyama was still thinking about it? Does it mean that maybe he had the second half, but he was still fine tuning it? You know, Toriyama's a discovery writer. We've gone over this before. When the manga was running, Toriyama was, you know, a lot of times coming up with the chapters week to week. He had ideas of where he wanted the story to go, but he wouldn't have like super extreme details thought out. At least not many of them. He liked to kind of play around and see where the story took him, you know, let the story sort of unfold itself while still reeling back the control. And that's how he's always been, you know, and that's, I think, why a lot of the Dragon Ball movies that he did, Resurrection F, Broly, and Superhero, why they sort of have a strange act structure, because he's writing them more like enclosed stories as opposed to arcs, you know, like the older era Dragon Ball stuff. So let's move on to the next one here. They put over Sasaki and Kubota for the, you know, Degasu and Goma's movements and how awesome they looked in the first episode. I mean, Kubota was really digging deep into that first episode to produce a lot of the stuff. Now, more interesting information. Ioku said that he was worried about the audience reaction. Yeah, tell me about it. When I first found out that this was where Daima was going, or Magic at the time, and that it was, they were turning people into kids again. I only heard of Goku and Shin. I didn't even know everybody else turning into kids. I immediately was like, okay, it's going to be compared to GT, and people are going to crap on it. Little did I know that the intention was to kind of do a modern retelling or a modern reboot of GT concepts. I like to call it a reboot of GT concepts, like what they did with Broly. It's not the same Broly, it's a reboot. It's not the same GT, it's Daima. But, you know, I had a feeling. But then when it was official, people were just crapping all over it. And, you know, and I, you know, for a while I was a little irritated, because I'm usually one of those guys that says, okay, let's wait and see. Like, let's wait and see what they do with it. Now, looking back, I do kind of understand. It's not really a great first impression. I did feel like the promotion early on was not great. Like, they try to be mysterious, but they wound up not giving us enough to really get excited about. You know what I mean? And then it even reveals that he says that Goma was popular among the anime staff, you know, who worked on it. Now, moving on to the next thing here, they kind of discussed about Shin and Degasu and kind of which character came first, because in the original drafts, based on the implications of these interviews, Toriyama had already thought up Goma. But some of the other characters, Shin and Dr. Orinsu, that came later. Goma, I think, was sort of set to be the villain from the very beginning, and for a while I thought he wasn't the villain. For a while, especially based on that first episode, Dr. Orinsu appeared to be the villain because she was the one that was cunning and going to betray him, even though ultimately she did betray him, but she went to the good side. It wasn't that he went to the good side. So, you know, it's hard to guess these things, especially when it comes from Toriyama, because he'll sometimes do the opposite of what you think. Moving on. Okay, next slide here. So they said that the preliminary discussions about Daima go back to 2018. Now, I know a lot of people are probably thinking, is that the Dragon Ball Super 2019 rumor? Is that where it started from? Like, is that where the misunderstanding of Super in 2019 came from? I don't know. It's possible. I, honest to God, do not know if there was a miscommunication. I know that they basically, whatever they were going to do was changed. And then Ioku, because Ioku wanted to produce more anime content, you know, and this interview confirms that. You know, I had done a video a while back called Where is Dragon Ball Super? Why Dragon Ball Daima? And in that video, I talked about Ioku wanting to do an anime, but Shueisha wanted to focus super on the manga, and so Daima was kind of like, the anime that they were thinking about. And early on, him and Toriyama discussed something different. Like it even says in this interview that they wanted to do something a little different. Then Superhero came along, so Toriyama wrote for that. They put the idea aside, but then they came back and, continued to work on it. It even says here, meetings for episode 1 began around 2020. See, that is crazy because no leaker, no insider in the entire fandom had talked about this. None. This was a very big top secret meeting with the tippy top people because, dude, nobody talked about this meeting. Like it did not get out that they were going to make another anime in 2020. That it was not Super. So could this have been where the Super 2019 rumor started? Possibly, but I have my doubts. Either way, we would have probably gotten more Super had Shueisha not wanted to refocus onto the manga, at some point. And I guess a lot of folks are still waiting for it. I couldn't even tell you. I've already said I'm not going to talk about it until we know. Now, right here, Yashima says he confirms the pilot. I talked about this on a stream. Many of you will remember it, many of you will not. The anime staff had to provide to Toriyama a snippet, an early view. I think I may have actually said it in my episode 1 review. I may have actually said it in that review where Toriyama was shown how it was going to look before the series even went fully into production. That was something I had found out right around the summer or autumn of 2023? 2023? Yeah, 2023. And I thought that was a big deal because that means that Toriyama really cared about this Daima show, like it or not. So what I did not know is that it was a 3-minute pilot. And that's interesting because to me, a 3-minute pilot sounds more like it's not really a pilot. A pilot is basically a full-length first episode to show to people to get them to buy your show. Most TV shows get pilots, but it being a 3-minute, this feels more like a 3-minute junket is what they call it, or like a 3-minute preview. Batman, the animated series, I think may have had something like this, and a lot of other shows did, where they kind of just drew it. Actually, Batman did have it. It's on the Blu-ray. And it's like an early version of what the show will ultimately end up being. Toriyama approved it, and I guess the producers did as well. So, again, they didn't want to have the animation issues that Super had with episode 5 and all that stuff. So then it says here Toriyama was the one that came up with the Demon Realm idea to explore a corner of the universe that had not been explored. They couldn't go into another universe because that was being saved for the Super stuff, even though we still haven't really seen that explored all that much. And then they talked about Warp pooping them out was Toriyama's idea. Of course it was. Of course it was. Now this is interesting. It says initially neither the format nor the release date had been decided. Now that's interesting because, the release date, that was definitely something we were all wondering about because the rumors of this quote unquote web anime really started kicking off in 2022. Right. And that's when they actually started to work on it. Like that's when the animation sheets were sent out. Like that's when it actually started going, not just pre-production, but like early production. Right. That was 2022. And the whole thing about it being a web anime, I guess, was the initial. I guess that was their plan, or maybe they thought, if anything, if we can't get it on TV, we'll have it be streaming. I mean, I know that streaming was picking up big, and Japan is not really that similar to the way it is outside of Japan when it comes to streaming, in that streaming is much bigger in other parts of the world as far as like exclusive streaming shows, but there's a lot of anime, including a lot of these live action anime, that are now streaming. So I'm thinking Japan's, now catching up to where the rest of the world is when it comes to like streaming content. But it wound up being on Fuji TV because after the passing of Toriyama, Fuji wanted it and it was smart, and so they got it. So, and then they said that's why the first episode ended up being longer than expected. There were no concrete plans for routine or distribution, or for runtime or distribution, excuse me, which once again proves it would have worked as a web anime, because the first episode was like 40 minutes. No, it was like 38 minutes, something like that, right? That wouldn't work for TV. But that day, Fuji got extra time, so hey, good for them. They talk about the Ayakomaki talks about the recording of the first episode, and the animation had already been colored. Now, usually in Japan, when they do the voiceover, it's unfinished. Like the voice actors are in there, and either they're voicing and then they animate the lips to match the actor, or it's unfinished black and white sort of reels, early reels, and then the actor voices it over. So at this point, everything had been done in color. And I had actually heard that the voice recordings were done way after the animation. They had plenty of time to work on this. Plenty of time. Super was very rushed. That's why those early arcs just don't look very good. Daima looked better because they had time, and hopefully whatever the next Dragon Ball project is, they have time. Komaki then recalls that according to the script, Neba was supposed to walk at a snail's pace. And I'm sure him not bathing was probably Toriyama's idea as well. I'm sure that was the joke. Ioku explains that Toriyama was very fond of elderly characters like grandparents, and making them almost protagonists is typical of his style. This is why Neba exists. Komaki adds that in her view, Nakatsuru also adores Neba. He corrected many drawings and other animators, excellently adding numerous wrinkles. Yeah, Neba was, and man, that first episode when he turned the Dragon Balls back on, we had never seen anybody do something like that. So I really hope we see Neba in the future in another story. Some of the vehicles were created in CG through a long and complex process. Yeah, but as far as we know, they were all designed by Toriyama. There was some CG in the show. Obviously, if you can pick up on it, there was, but it was mostly 2D animation. But a lot of the flying stuff in space and the planes, that was CG. And then Yashima adds that Toriyama was very meticulous about the mechanics. He explains the reason for every detail and even creates three-dimensional views. Yes, you can see some of that if you pick up some of the earlier Toriyama like drafts. You see him pointing at different levers, what they do. Like, he's a big nerd when it comes to stuff like that. So Akio Ioku says, he was very meticulous about the depiction of food. Of course, we all know anime food is always drawn to look delicious, right? And they talk about like the advanced technology of Capsule Corp when it comes to food. Not really anything big. Now, here's the Gohan one. Here's the Gohan slide. Even though Gohan Mini never appears, there's an unpublished design for him. So we do have a Gohan Mini design. Toei has it. Toriyama drew it. And Ioku says, we had the sensei draw him just in case. That means that in one of the original drafts, Gohan was supposed to be there with them. Was he supposed to go into the demon realm? They don't go into that. At some point, it was decided to not have Gohan in the show. And I know a lot of Gohan fans would have wanted to see that. And it says that it would have been a good idea to include him in at least an eye catch. And they didn't. They did not do that. We have not seen Gohan Mini. But now we know it exists. Now we know that there is a Gohan Mini. And Gohan Mini is not going to look like Kid Gohan from like Dragon Ball Z. He's not gonna look quite like that. He's gonna have like the spiky hair of like adult Gohan, you know, the one from like Ultimate Gohan, but he'll be mini, like a kid again, but just with the hair spiky. So it'll be that look. But that is insane because like the whole time we all were asking where's Gohan. People were asking me, is Gohan gonna be in it? I'm like, I hope so. I mean, it's even people who are really smart when it comes to this were saying that there's no way they could leave Gohan out. He's too important and they're purposely not showing him for a reason. Even I said that. Like, I felt like they were purposely not showing him for a reason. Turns out they just didn't put him in. I wish I knew more about that. So it goes in. They start talking about their fandom of Dragon Ball from Yashida's perspective. There were young animators who grew up with Dragon Ball. I mean, we all kind of knew that. Ioku notes that this time many people on the production staff were working on Dragon Ball for the first time, and that's a beautiful thing to know about because a lot of these kids like grew up. A lot of them are probably near my age or even younger, grew up with this, and now they get to actually work on it. And some of them get to actually look at Toriyama's designs before the public gets to, and that's got to be an honor. Yashima adds that only Karasawa, had prior experience directing Dragon Ball. All other series directors were newcomers to the franchise. Komaki praised Toru Iwasawa, who handled the storyboard and animation for the scene. This is episode 1. A big Dragon Ball fan and a talented animator, action animation supervisor on Frieren Iwasawa, managed to convey his style from the storyboard stage. Well, that's good. The closer you can get to the Toriyama style, the better. And really, Daima was a sequel to the Buu Saga and most likely the manga Buu Saga, even though the manga and anime Buu Sagas aren't that radically different. So it's whatever. So they were talking about how to end the first episode. And of course, it was the cliffhanger where they all become kids and they play the music. And it says that despite their planning, they heard reports that some fans were confused since not all characters are shown in their child forms and the scene ends with a scream. Komaki explains his choice was intentional. I mean, we knew what was going on based on the trailer, but they did say in the interview that like they were worried because the first episode had a lot of the villains. They basically chewed up most of the screen time, but they felt like they had to introduce them and get the plot going. And then we have, of course, the Capsule Corp stuff, and we have Goku and Vegeta training in the sky, and then bam, they're all kids again, and away we go with our adventure. So I really hope we see more directors' commentaries. I really hope that we get more information. I've got an update coming up this week about Dragon Ball Super from Toyotaro, but that's going to do it for this video. I hope you sat through the whole thing. I really appreciate you for that. I will see you guys real soon. Take care of yourself and be good. We're doing our best here. Take care of yourself and each other. That's the important thing. And each other, man. Peace.